Hey guys, welcome back to Russian Libertas Corpus YouTube channel. That's us, Alexei Postnikov and Gala Bagatova. And today's video is gonna be pretty sad because it's 1 year of this terrible war that Putin started in Ukraine exactly a year ago. And we want just maybe briefly talk about what's changed in Russia during this year, because the suffering of Ukraine is on display in every news. But what's going on in Russia usually is not as terrible, and I'm not comparing the situations, but
It's just
the
where we have more expertise on what's going on in Russia, and that's why we're speaking of that.
yes, and we care about Russia because it is our motherland.
Yeah, it's just it's sick.
Yeah,
Yeah, our motherland is sick. So I understand that in this video we're going to consider the big shifts in the landscape of political life in Russia,
yeah,
and also touch upon some personal experiences that emphasize what's actually going on with people on the example of us,
yeah.
with respect to these changes. Like, how are we mapping our personal experience in this big picture of political change, right?
Yeah. So maybe let's start with topics that probably easier to talk about, which is Russian political system. So before the war started, basically we have this discussion going on in Russian intellectual circles. Is Russia a fascist country? Because it was, I would say, a valid discussion that is it fully fascist? Is it is to call it fascist is to dramatize the situation?
Right.
Yeah.
So I think I
Yeah.
think this is a very important question about what is fascism, what is the pure fascism, and what version of fascism is now present in Russia. It's a valid issue to discuss, but I think what matters the most is what is the real political shift that sort of moves the Russian regime towards fascism in the spectrum of the
Right.
existent regime. And I find that the most important thing that changed is the motivation that is being sold to the Russian population, because the before the war, Russia also has been an autocracy. It was no surprise. We had this a very rigid and straightforward political hierarchy, and we know who's been on top of this hierarchy. But the narrative that was mostly predominant in the political discourse, it promoted political inactiveness, political disengagement of the population. It basically was saying, please do nothing, stay away from politics, pretend that do not understand anything in it, give us all the cards and all the leverage, and just stay away. Be in peace. We will provide you with anything you need to feel comfort. We will deprive you, we will set you free from the responsibility
Yeah.
for your life, but just stay away from politics. Just vote for somebody who needs to receive your vote.
For the right
For the right
man,
person, and that's it. So this political inactivity was the basement of the social contract. What changed after the war
right.
created a new narrative that is moving us towards totalitarian regime, and
Yeah.
it's promoting political activity, but in a very specific way that is dictated by the regime's doctrine. It says you need to participate in politics, but only in a way that we want you to. Moreover, if you don't, you're going to be punished. So it's not just promotion of political activity. It's they're forcing people to engage with it, but it only in a certain way. Otherwise, you either exit or you die, or you are the subject to oppression.
Yeah.
So that's absolutely new to the contemporary Russia. It's a new era. It's not new to the Stalin's era. It's not new to maybe some other periods of Russian history, but for the contemporary history, it's quite a new phenomenon that represents the major change in the political regime.
Yeah, but would you say this social contract was broken the day the war started, or and I'm with that second group that thinks that this social contract was broken at the day when Russia started mobilization,
right.
So-called partial mobilization,
right.
Because for this first 6 months of the war, I think Russian government they were still trying to keep sort of business as usual narrative for people in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they did have this crazy Z hysteria, and apparently the first few months, quite a lot of people who are still a minority in Russia, I believe,
mm-hmm.
were pretty vocal about their support of the so-called special military operation. But after, mostly it was propagated by local authorities, governors, and of course federal power in Kremlin.
Mm-hmm.
But for rest of people, it was we have some sort of this weird, I don't know, like a cosplay Z whatever
mm-hmm.
thing. But if you want to live your life, just live your life. Something changed, but not a lot.
Not a lot, but actually there was a lot of change in the educational system, and that's a big sign of it.
Yeah.
When you touch kids, it's already a big deal. Even if you don't feel it now, these kids are going to be affected by this narrative, by this propaganda and this ideology created as a cosplay, as you rightfully mentioned. It still it affects people. It affects them on their personal level, and these kids are the part of the system where they don't have a choice. They go to school and they do what they're told to do. And it's up to the teacher, if the teacher is conscious enough, to sabotage the instructions to, brainwash the poor kids. But if the teacher is brainwashed him or herself, or they're cowards and just follow whatever they're being, told, then it's, forcing little people into political activity that they are not choosing. So that's a big deal. That's a very big sign of the totalitarian regime. Another change that I would emphasize in terms of Russia is the concentration on the inside, because they have the elites. All these years, these elites, they were targeting, they were absorbing the resources at home and spending it abroad. They were buying property, they were sending their kids to study abroad, they were spending vacation there, they were living lives abroad in the Western countries, in Europe for the most part, while just exploiting their homeland resources to sustain this level of life. What is happening now? They're blocked. This motivation is non-existent anymore because they're under sanctions, or their property is arrested. So what is happening now is interesting because their motivation has changed completely.
Right.
That's another big shift that I don't see a lot of people are talking about, but I understand that is quite a big difference.
So recently, one of the recent videos of Ekaterina Shulman, by the way, if you guys, you can find some of her interviews in English. We really recommend.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, she had this thought that maybe Russian government preparing a new type of social contract where it's going to be money.
Money for the body, right?
Yes, money for the body for poor people.
Right.
And just way more money
for the loyalty
elites.
of elites. Yeah, I heard that. I think it's really reflecting the reality which you mentioned, that now the social contract is changed. It's not your safety for your loyalty or your safety for your sacrifice. It's the money. Now, because this money, they have it a lot and they can't spend it abroad anymore. They spend it inside. The purpose, but the channel of these expenditures is now buying people's loyalty or buying people's bodies, right?
And in literal sense,
in
because
a literal sense, yeah.
There is the whole financial system behind mobilization, and as we see, like, people are getting amounts of money they could not imagine in their everyday life. What changed for me during this year, fortunately enough, people who I know, they didn't turn to be so-called Z patriots. So nobody supports the war, but I know people, some of my friends are in some sort of denial. So they try not denial of the war. They just, we don't talk about it because
that would be that would be, that's just, I understand. This is just makes no sense for them to recognize the reality, because how are they going to exist in this reality if they cannot exit the system, if they cannot protest, if they have to sacrifice their life literally for expressing the discontent about the happening? Their choice is just to stay in denial, which is I disapprove this choice. It's still their responsibility. They will still bear the consequence of this choice, but at the same time, people, the majority of people, they don't have really much of the capacity for critical thinking. They don't have much of a willpower, and they're pretty much, in their majority, are risk aversive. So what I would suggest in this context is how the social media, how the political discourse has changed as well. How the propaganda is now absolutely straightforwardly playing and brainwashing people's mind, which didn't happen to this extent before the war. It was not so grave. It was not so straightforwardly, absurd.
Yeah.
It's absolute nonsense what they're doing now. And what do you think? Do you think this actually makes people I think it just does.
I mean, it creates, I think the propaganda still works for so the goal of propaganda to create, and it was the goal of propaganda, at least for the last 12 years in Russia, to create this fictional majority to suppress any voices against Putin's regime. They just pushing this narrative that we are the majority, we're, we control this country, like we support Putin, and if you don't agree with it, you're an absolute minority, you're marginalized, and nobody cares about that.
To make you feel isolated in your opposition.
Yeah, and I think now it's just it's still the same, the same message, but just delivery got really, really aggressive. If before that you would maybe feel, marginalized and alone, at some risk of prosecution if you're a political activist, but if you just simply against regime but not doing much, you're not an activist, not journalist, not one of the group of risks, you still can live relatively safe without thinking about, like, oh, am I going to be arrested? But I'm just alone in this.
Right. So this feeling of your loneliness in your opposition, in your critical thinking, creates the feeling of powerlessness, and it condemns you to just either, suicide, or to just pretend that you are not knowledgeable enough to make come to certain conclusions or to make judgments. Because if you cannot leave this country, if you cannot exit immigrate, which is a pretty difficult path to take, then you are living, you're facing an absolutely disheartening landscape, which is not easy to survive in mentally.
But for me, it's really hard to talk to anybody from Russia, because now we literally, it feels like we live in different worlds, like
different dimensions.
Yes, because for them, and my friends, they were protesting a year ago when the war started, and those rallies were brutally suppressed. So now, they don't have any illusions about the war, but I would say like their mental state is well, I'm not the one to judge, but it's pretty hard. It's really hard to live in this basically in a hostile environment. So
it's not a hostile. Like, I understand that when you like, the experience of Ukrainians is absolutely, I will not even compare. It's shocking what's happening there, and I agree, and I deeply, I cry every time I think about it. But when you have the goal, you understand you're defending your country. You understand that all the world, supports you. You are mentally sober. You have the energy. Ukrainians are uniting. Their spirit is so strong. What's happening to Russians, it's less threatening to their lives unless they open their mouth. So it's more of a mental prison that some of these people are living. It's the cognitive dissonance they experience every day. And I understand that there are some, like, there are just assholes who don't care. There are people like that everywhere in Russia as well. But there are also people who understand what is happening, and they just can't do anything about it.
We're recording this video before February 24th. It's going to be published today as you're watching this, hopefully. So we don't know what's going to happen on February 24th in Russia, because if there are going to be protests, they will be brutally suppressed. And also, if there are going to be any protests, just keep in mind, reading this news, that the price for protesting in Russia right now, the price increased dramatically during this year. Before that, usually it was just fine unless you're an activist and they want to put you in jail. So the risks they were there. They were more or less understandable, so you can weigh the risks. Now the risk for everybody who gets out there and protests, up to 15 years in jail.
Drop the comment down below, click the bell, click the like, share it with your friends who don't know what's happening.
Yeah, and ask us more questions, because we're gonna be here.
Hopefully.
Yes. See you next time.